this goes. Perfect. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us tonight. We're super excited to have this conversation. We do want to start this evening in a good way and to center our relationship with the land, the peoples of the land, and with our responsibilities as Treaty 7 people. So we are hosting from Treaty 7 territory tonight. I think most of us are also based there. And Treaty 7 territory is on our kind of covers the traditional territories and home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani. And these lands are also home to Tsuut'ina Nation, Stoney Nakoda Nation, and home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Treaty 7 is and was a promise between nations to share the land and to support one another. And it's up to each and every one of us to work to make this place and the world better for all future generations. It's part of our obligations as treaty people. So something that we want everyone to reflect on is what are you doing to honor your relationship with the land and your responsibilities as a treaty partner? You don't have to answer that, of course, but definitely we want to encourage everybody to think about that and what that means for them as a person who is living on these lands and building community on these lands, and also thinking about that from our community lenses as well. Our plan for the evening is to have a really wonderful conversation about asset-based community development and what that looks like here in Calgary. And specifically, we are going to get to hear from 4 different people who are involved with different block connector initiatives here in Calgary, which is going to be a really great learning opportunity for us all to harness some of that wisdom and think about what else do we need to support this moving forward? How do we build on this momentum to make sure that not only are these efforts successful, but that we're able to do this in our own communities as well if we're not part of some of those places where it's happening. I should introduce myself before I get much farther. I always forget to do that, but my name is Amanda Palmer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white settler who's been a guest here in Mohkinstsis for the past 7 years now. I think actually today is my anniversary, my moving anniversary. I have the pleasure and privilege of being the lead of the Community Development Learning Initiative, which is a network for community-minded Calgarians. And what we try to do is we come together for important conversations to connect, inspire, and act to make our communities better. So we host regular meetings like this one, which many of you have been part of before. We also have spaces specifically for community development practitioners to deepen their practice and connect with peers. And we also have a curriculum, a community development learning program that helps build the knowledge and skills around community building. And several of you here have both helped facilitate that and have also been a part of that over the years. So it's great to see you again. And we're actually starting our next round soon. So if you're interested, let me know. But I don't want to talk too long. I really want us to be able to get into the panel. Something that we wanted to do before we launch into the conversation is to lay a bit of the groundwork. So you should have all received some of this information in the email sent out with the Zoom link, but we wanted to kind of first define what we mean when we're talking about asset-based community development, as well as abundant community. So I'm going to share what I shared via email earlier, just so that we're all on the same page. So asset-based community development is an approach to building just, sustainable, and resilient communities. And from the Tamarack Institute, it defines ABCD, the acronym for asset-based community development, as something that's looking for and starting from people's gifts and strengths, what they call their assets. And these assets equip people to create local opportunities. Asset-based community development usually focuses on the possibilities as opposed to the deficits that exist in our community, or the needs, sometimes how we frame it. And that shift from focusing on the possibilities from the needs really radically shifts the way that we engage in and activate community, and also shifts the ways in which community identifies itself. So that's an important distinction from kind of other community development approaches. Asset-based community development recognizes that there is power in communities, and it also reframes how we engage in community to ensure that what emerges is both by community and for community. So it's meant to be driven by community members themselves, not external agencies. And while professionals can play an important role, their focus should be on assisting communities to drive their own community development. And we've also linked in a resource for that. And that can be something that is challenging for people to grapple with. Of what does that mean? What is the place for something like a community association or an organization that's invested in using this approach? And perhaps it's something we'll hear about tonight, I'm not sure. But those are some of those key features. So really focusing on the strengths that exist within the community and using that as a starting point, instead of looking at the needs of the community, focusing on what is possible here based on the strengths that we have, and really shifting that power to make sure that it's our community that's driving what's happening and creating the change that the community wants to see. So then the next thing we wanted to talk about to set the stage is abundant community. And we are talking about abundant community because it is a model of asset-based community development that there's kind of like a book by a couple of the key people who supported this sort of like theory or framework that's called abundant community, and it talks about focusing on the people who have the gifts and talents to provide for prosperity and peace, and really looking at that at a neighborhood level. But Abundant Community Edmonton is an initiative to that started, I can't remember exactly when, but it's definitely been more than 5 years. And it's an initiative that looked to actually put into practice this model in a meaningful way, supported by the city of Edmonton, in partnership with some really engaged residents who made this happen. And so it's a grassroots initiative that fosters neighbor-to-neighbor relationships, with the goal being to cultivate a culture of care and connection, increase a sense of belonging and inclusion, and ultimately create a more healthy and livable city. And the Abundant Community Initiative model, it looks at having these neighborhood connectors that support and engage block connectors who are building those neighborly relationships. And this initiative has really helped spark and support a lot of what we're seeing in Calgary these days, because they've had a lot of great resources and through their own piloting have been able to help others get started. So we wanted to give you that background context. So if you're curious to look at more in what we sent earlier, and we'll send stuff afterwards as well, you can see a bit about their journey, but that kind of helps you to see how we got to where we are today, and we can explore what that looks like and means here in Calgary. So that's a lot of information. I bet a lot of you know that already, given the various opportunities that I've seen you at before, but it's important that we're on the same page. And now we're going to get to the reason that you're all here tonight, which is to hear from our panel and learn what exactly is happening here in Calgary, how's it going, and what lessons can you take for your own community efforts. So I have the honor of introducing our panel today. I think we've all made it here now. I know a few people were running a little bit late. And if I think I see you all. So first we have Janelle Kermode. I'm not sure if I said your last name right. If I didn't, I really apologize. But we have Janelle here with the Abundant Community Copperfield Mahogany Initiative. And Janelle is a nurse, a mom, a wife, and a neighbor. She loves her street and wants her kids to have the joy that she did of playing on the street and being able to have the neighbors be an extension of your family. Since many of us do not have family around, they, our neighbors, become those who help uplift you on your worst days and celebrate the best ones with you. And Janelle has been running some really creative connecting opportunities with neighbors throughout COVID as well. So we're really excited to have Janelle here and excited to hear from Janelle. We also have with us this evening Jody Mamaman, who is with the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good's Abundant Community Calgary Neighborhood Block Project, and coordinates that project. So this program supports individuals in building strong communities at a neighborhood block level while contributing to a culture of care that also increases civic engagement, a sense of belonging, resiliency, and safety. Jody has a Master of Arts in Leadership and has worked for over 10 years as a community educator. And she also co-created Refugia Retreats, which some of you may be aware of, which is an initiative that creates experiences and spaces to explore the intersections between the environment, justice, and mental health, and is excited to bring her experience to the work of building connections at the community block level. Welcome, Jody. We also have with us a very familiar face within the CDLI world. Tyson Bankert is with the Crescent Heights Community Association's new Neighborhood Block Connector program. Tyson has been working and volunteering and supporting neighborhood life for as long as he can remember. His interest in community comes at the intersection of justice and community development, and his work is based on equity, wellness, and agency. His personal slogan is promote justice, edify others, and befriend the lonely. Welcome, Tyson. And last, but certainly not least, we have with us this evening Anne Nauman. I also apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Anne is the Vice President of the Highland Park Community Association and is a supporter of their new Block Connector program, which was developed in response to COVID-19. Anne has been an active resident and member of the Highland Park Community Association for many years, and she was involved in a community-wide asset mapping initiative a few years ago that sparked new connections and uncovered some of the history of the neighborhood. And if you've taken the CDLI training recently, you will be familiar with Anne, who has graciously come in and shared a little bit about that initiative with us in the past. So welcome back, Anne. So with that, we're all here, we're all on the same page, hopefully, and we will launch into hearing from you about your experiences. So to start, we wanted to get a sense from each of you. Why did you or your community start this initiative? And what aspect of asset-based community development and the abundant communities model are you most focused on? And maybe we'll ask Anne, do you want to start us off? What made this community association decide to start this initiative, this Block Connector initiative?
Sure. Yeah, so I was going to talk a little bit about the asset mapping, which kind of led into the Block Connector program. We worked with some outside guidance to develop the asset mapping. Lauren Mangian was involved with that. And we started that in late, I guess it was late 2018, and then carried through 2019. Had a little committee going and worked to identify different categories of assets that we wanted to put on a map and put onto our website. And it's kind of a live document, so we update it periodically with new photos or new information as it comes forward. And we finished that in the tail end of 2019, before any of us knew that there was a new virus starting up. And we had decided that what the next step really made sense was to start this Block Connector program to build on some of the connections we'd made with additional neighbors, and to try to see if we could do some ultra local connections and the community building activities, getting to know your neighbors. We've been trying to work on those sorts of pieces for a number of years. Anyway, yeah, so we had, that was kind of an idea that started in the tail end of 2019, and then we had our first planning meeting in early 2020, first couple, and then all of a sudden, oh, okay, and now we're closing our hall, we can no longer meet in person. But we decided, let's just keep going, because what better to have during a pandemic than a way to connect with your neighbors in case you had to self-isolate or whatever, or were feeling isolated just being at home in your house. So yeah, so we worked to recruit some people through our using our newsletter, using our email system, using our website, using social media, to recruit people that would be willing to serve as neighbors. We worked with our community city liaison person to help sort of figure out somehow some of the pieces. And yeah, at the moment, I think we have 8 or something block connectors in the neighborhood, and we've carved up the neighborhood into little chunks. Um, and yeah, it's been a pretty good program. We've had a few activities through the pandemic. We had a self-guided art walk where people would put an article of art, whatever it was, a painting or a sculpture or something, out on their front lawn, and they would man it if they wanted to or whatever. And we had somebody volunteer to set up a little Google map to identify the the homes where you could go and see this art and talk to the person if they're around. Did a similar thing later in the year with a garden tour, having people show off generally their front gardens unless they were going to be available to show people their back gardens. It was it was quite amazing to see what some people have got growing. And yeah, and we've done a couple of the little things. We just did a bit of an update with our community liaison officer with Calgary Police. There was a few people that were concerned about some break and enter or car prowling stuff in the neighborhood. So we were able to get a Zoom call with the police officer that deals with our neighborhood, and used our block connector network to help recruit people to attend that. So yeah, it's coming along. I don't know what else.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I would love to jump to Janelle now, if we could. Janelle, do you want to tell us a little bit about why your community started this block connector initiative, and what it was like kind of pre-COVID and making that transition to connecting in COVID times?
Well, I think ours started when I first moved onto our street. I was lucky enough to move onto a street where Evan lives. I'm sure everybody knows Evan. And yeah, we, first moved in. My next door neighbor, Una, came over and, helped with our mattress, just small things like that. And then it's kind of just grown, and we had the first block party the first year I moved in, which I think was 5 years ago. And then, every year since then, our block parties have just increased. We have our own Facebook page. We also have a list on the Facebook page of everyone's house and their contact numbers. So just kind of nice if you go away or whatever. And then, COVID really changed everything, I think, for a lot of people. Our street's really great. We always try and do events, whether it's impromptu, hey, we're going to have a barbecue tonight. Does anyone want to come over? We're going to do games. We're very much an impromptu, which was a lot of fun, but COVID had really restricted that. And I think the first shutdown in March was so scary for everybody. And a lot of us were just kind of in our house and nobody really saw each other. And then kind of saw everybody in France out, and in New York doing the pots and pans. And that was, to me, I was like, well, why don't we just go out there every night at 7:00 and do our pots and pans, not only a great way to support, the first line workers, but also a great way for us to get to see our neighbors at a distance, oh, hey, yeah, you're still okay. Okay, me too. And also for the kids, it was the best for the kids. The kids love to get out there, make some noise, see the neighbor kids, even if you was at a distance. And so we did that almost diligently, rain, snow, shine. Some nights I would post, let's do an 80s theme. Everyone dress up and we'll go bang pots and pans in our 80s gear, something to look forward to. And then as it, everything kind of went on, and then kind of sort of got back to working and everyone, but still keeping that distance. Everyone is just, okay, well, it's getting nice out. And then it was my mom's birthday, and I thought, I'd heard on CBC about the local artists that aren't able to, the musicians that aren't able to go and play and how they're suffering. And I thought, oh, well, why don't I host an outdoor concert for my mom's birthday and tell the street, like, stay on your lawn. I'm going to have this guy come and perform for us. And so my street was able to, everybody put out lawn chairs, you know, it was nice. And we had a fiddler come, and he did a fiddler concert for 45 minutes. And that was so much fun. And the kids loved it. And that was just kind of like how I connected that way. Sorry, I have a 3-year-old yelling at me, go see your dad. And then I had we couldn't do our block party like we wanted to again, which kind of was a real big downer because we love our block parties. So we usually do what's called Eat Together once a year too, which is we all put a meal out in someone's backyard and everyone brings a dish. So we thought we'd do an Eat Together for our street party, and we kind of just put up barricades that were illegal, but whatever, on the street to stop the drivers from coming through. And everyone pulled out a table in their front, you know, in the front street, because we have 2 alley exits so people could still get through, and everyone cooked their own meals, and we still sat outside and talked to each other and had a dinner together. So that was our block party this year. And then, you know, the summers and stuff like that, I had my husband's 40th. So again, I just told the street, you know what, it's going to be outside. I had a big tent. I said, you can socially distance. Everybody can come and have a drink. And then came winter again. Cases went up, and it was more of a shutdown, and Christmas was not looking good. And, you know, again, a lot of us don't have family, and, you know, we usually celebrate Christmas with our street or have, you know, a Christmas party. So at that point, I'd heard CBC is a great way to hear about things. I heard about an a cappella group that was going to do a live performance and encouraged a lot of Calgarians to come out on their street and sing with them. So I brought my outdoor speaker outside, and I encouraged the street to come out, and we did outdoor caroling with my outdoor speaker. Freezing cold, but again, the kids loved it. They played in the snow, and that, right? I just trying to find ways where we can still connect with each other, even though we have these restrictions in place, and kind of just supporting and making sure everyone is feeling included. Yeah, you know, some people were like, I'll come to this because then I feel more comfortable, and allowing everyone to have that level of comfort. So it's been tough, and, you know, it's getting to that January, February time. So if anyone has any great ideas for the January, February blues where we could do something fun, I'm all for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing about your journey and the amazing things that you were able to do. It's really inspiring.
It's a lot of fun, you know, you just have to remember that your neighbors are here with you too, and we all have those same feelings. All of us are in it together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tyson, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to Crescent Heights and what led you to start this. I know this is relatively new as of this month, so you're still early stages, but if you could speak to why Crescent Heights is kind of doing this type of work now, and what you're focusing on from that perspective. I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Tyson. As Amanda mentioned, I live in Crescent Heights. So for those of you who maybe don't know, it's where Peters Drive-In is, off of 16th and between Edmonton Trail and 4th Street, northwest. And so we're just north of the Bow River. And I'll also mention as well that I have a dog, and she's not as neighborly as I am, and she just likes to bark when she hears her arch nemesis outside. But anyway, outside of that, I have been living in Crescent Heights for about 3 years, and I think in that time, Crescent Heights has really created a lot of really great momentum around engaging our neighbors. in the few years that I've been there, and there's plenty of really great factors that have created Crescent Heights to be a really place to really just start doing things. And it's really great to hear Janelle and Anne also talk about, like, part of this is just do it and see what happens and experiment and have fun and play as well. So the last couple of years, Crescent Heights has done a lot of murals, these intersection murals along the street. We've been recognized for one of our longer murals that's on along Center Street, between just off of Center Street Bridge. And I would say, and Sandra's here as well. She's the person on the board who's also been pushing these things forward for the last year and a half. And I think all of those things combined have really inspired this sense of ownership in the community. I've done a lot of work in community development, and oftentimes it sometimes feels like you're servicing people, or you're part of a function of sort of to service the community. And for me, it really is about how do we sort of shift that perspective to have residents feeling like there's more ownership within their block. And that's kind of where I believe the Block Connector program really transpired from, is this a sense of how can we get more people engaged in their community, and also to be able to base it on their strengths, so their passions, their interests, the things that they want to do. And that really, for me, like mitigates that sense of burnout, where if you're kind of working in your strengths, what does that look like? So that's sort of the intention that I've had with the Neighborhood Block Connector program. And so we are still in our growing phase of really just recruiting people. And I think it's a really great way. I'm someone who likes to just chat with people one-on-one, and as I bump into people. And right now that's been really hard to do that, of course, because what's been great is we've, even just yesterday, I've been hosting a weekly Zoom hangout for folks to come in and engage. And yesterday it was just myself and somebody else. But in that whole hour conversation of getting to know this person, my neighbor, it was really great to kind of hear the strengths and how he thought maybe he can participate. And I also think it's a really great way to, depending on where you might be coming from, it's a different lens for a neighbor to get involved. So, currently within Crescent Heights, in the Crescent Heights Community Association, which is putting this on, when I'm engaging with folks, I can kind of say, yeah, there's the Neighborhood Block Connector program, which might be about connecting with your neighbors at the block level based on maybe you're an artist, or maybe you're a musician, and that might be your way to connect. Or maybe you can come to the community action team meeting, which Sandra is hosts to sort of volunteer at the different events that are happening. Or maybe it's about being on the board. So there's this spectrum of different ways that people can get involved. And I think hopefully whichever one that looks like, it's really based on your strengths. And I think what's been really cool to see in Crescent Heights is this sense of specifically with our artist roster, for example, a lot of them, a lot of the artists, when we put out a call to an artist to kind of do an activity or action, we have people come back. And I think that's part of it, is there's a sense of, oh yeah, this is rooted in my strength. And so we want to kind of keep developing that, whether that's someone who has like a snowblower, for example. And those things kind of happen organically. Like, we have neighbors helping each other. But what if it looked like if people knew, hey, like this person is willing and open to having either sharing that tool they have, or otherwise. So there's just a lot of different ways that I think what strength looks like depending on how they want to get involved.
Awesome, thank you so much. I think you're absolutely right, and I appreciated also you highlighting that this is sort of like one of the tools that Crescent Heights is using to look at those strengths, and I'm creating just another entry point to let people show up however they're ready to show up. I think that's critical for how we think about all of this work, because we all have different time commitments and capacities and energies. So thank you so much for sharing. I want to ask Jody now if you could, I saved you for last because everybody else has really spoken to neighborhood specific examples of what this is looking like here in Calgary. And we're really interested to know what led you and your organization to put together a citywide approach, and like, what does that mean for you? What are you focused on from that abundant communities model?
For sure. Thanks for asking. So with Calgary, I work for Calgary Alliance for the Common Good, and we received a grant during COVID to look at kind of community development and community building in the midst of COVID. And one of the things we were hearing back from the communities that are part of Calgary Alliance was really around social isolation and mental health. And I personally have just moved here from Edmonton, kind of right around that time, and had some connection and involvement to the abundant communities work there, was quite aware of it, and really excited by the different ways that it looks at strengths building and asset-based community development and recognizing the agency of people in their own communities, and wondering what that looks like to get that going kind of on a citywide level here. And so part of what the approach we're taking with Calgary Alliance is to build a small group where people who are wanting to connect on their block level can come and get support, generate ideas, and kind of connect as they're starting to get to know their neighbors on their block. And that's something I'm doing as well on my block in Mount Pleasant. And part of the reason for that is because when you're not connected to a community association, or you don't have an organization that's kind of backing you or supporting you in that way, it can often become challenging to, especially in the midst of COVID, to connect. So the hope is that as we are building and connecting together, we can start to support each other as we connect to our communities too. And yeah, I guess that's kind of what I wanted to say about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It is such a great addition and resource to supporting this work and creating those regular opportunities for those of us working in our own neighborhoods to come together and share ideas of what's working for us, and can generate new ideas. And the learning opportunities, I think, as well, are really, really helpful to be able to kind of dig in on really specific elements of kind of building those relationships with our neighbors. So great. Thanks for sharing. So we wanted, the Meetup Learning and Action team kind of came up with some questions to put out to our panel tonight. And one of the questions we had is, what does success look like for you? Like what is your kind of like big vision for this work? And what are you, how do you kind of like measure that and express that to others? And whoever wants to talk can talk.
I can go really quick here. I think one of the ways that I want to perceive success is seeing that sense of ownership. And I just want to recall back a couple of years ago, Crescent Heights did this thing called the Village Hub. And basically we had a space that was along Center Street, and a very small space, but the idea behind the Village Hub in the summer of 2019, I guess, summer of 2019 was to inspire people residents to use that space in however they wanted. And so there was a lot of different programming. So a resident came in to do yoga, another resident came in to do woodworking. We had different art on the walls that people could purchase. And so it was just a trial run, but I think that really helped myself and I think a few other people not only get connected, but also think about what's possible. In Crescent Heights, our community association isn't really heavily utilized, just based on location, but that was a really great traffic flow that we were having. And I think from there, it really set a tone of what the potential is in the community. And one of the ways I think that we can determine success within the Neighborhood Block Connector program, or one of the ways that I'm going to try and test out is through as a community association, we want to provide different events. And oftentimes it's the engagement piece is about kind of knowing who's in your neighborhood. And, are there lots of kids? Are there lots of seniors? And those demographics and understanding that demographic, those demographics in your neighborhood is really important. And we don't fully know all of what that looks like. But what I'm also really interested in is identifying what kind of strengths are in neighborhood, what kind of interests and passions are there. So if we have a high increase of people who are really interested in the environment, based on what the block connectors hopefully do is build on those relationships and understand who's on their block, what are they interested in, and being able to then connect people as these things come up. So for example, as I mentioned, we have like an artist roster. So we know that there's a fairly large scale of artists in our neighborhood. So that might reflect what we start to do as a community association. And so I wanted to be able to sort of begin identifying what are some of those demographics, or you know, I don't really know what the right word is, but that those strength-based demographics to begin to really engage our neighborhood as well, and see what happens from there. So that will be one of the ways that I think we'll begin to sort of see if we're making any momentum.
Awesome, thank you. How about for our other lovely panelists? What does success look like for you? How will you know you've been successful? Or if you want to speak to that community ownership piece, like what does that mean for you? How do you foster that?
I think like for me, it would be success is to get that one neighbor on your street that never participates, to all the, like the one that you see at the mailbox that, you know, just says hi, but doesn't actually, you don't know much about them. I think it's to get them to feel that sense of ownership and community, and not that this is just a house that I come into, you know, that just brings the groceries in and doesn't stop and say, hey, how was your day? Or, you know, that's your measurement of success, because there are people that are social like me, and there are people that are less comfortable. You know, like on our street, we have a very unique sense of, we have a lot of Venezuelans, we have a couple of Spanish, and, you know, one recently unfortunately moved away, but they, you know, would come out and bring the food. And when we do eat together, we try and encourage them to bring a dish from their home and everything, you know, those traditional dishes, and teach us about, because they didn't feel like their language skills were, you know, maybe there, and having them come out and stop and say hi to you now, that's the measurement, I think, for me, of connecting with someone who probably didn't feel like they were connecting to start off with.
Thank you so much for sharing. Go ahead,
I can probably echo what Janelle was saying. That's what I think we'd like to see come out of our Block Connector program, is getting a little bit more interaction between neighbors, seeing if we can get people to know each other's names instead of just driving by. We have a lot of relatively high percentage of turnover. There's a lot of rental units in our like up down bungalows. So some people are here for a relatively short time and maybe just don't even want to invest the time in the neighborhood, but other people are, we're trying to see if we can build a little bit more connection between neighbors, and maybe build a future sort of volunteer pipeline for future board members or other committee work down the road to help all the stuff that goes into running a community association. So yeah, it's challenging, especially since we started during COVID. I mean, I think Janelle had a head start because they already had something up and running before COVID. So it's been a little bit of a challenge to be creative as how do we do a physically distant event? Oh, okay, let's do a self-guided walking tour, and here's a map, and here's what's going to be on it. There's a few things, but yeah, it's I'd like to just see if some more people get engaged with different community events and community activities, community residents. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing, Anne.
And then I think for me, like on a macro level, what we're hoping for is to have 12 communities that are starting to build community connections in the city by the end of the year. And then of course, like we would love to see it on every block in the city, which obviously is a huge vision, but really looking at supporting leadership development as people engage with their own assets and their own strengths and are really asking questions about what sort of neighborhood do they want to be a part of and what sort of neighborhood can they dream of or envision. So the thing I didn't say earlier is we're not just meeting once a month, but I'm also meeting with people kind of once a month, one-on-one, to really help them kind of connect to what is the neighborhood they want to be a part of, what are their strengths and what are their passions for that neighborhood, and then to begin to build some of that asset mapping kind of skills, as well as whatever kind of needs to come from there, but just to give some additional support to some of that.
Thanks so much. Does anybody have any other thoughts they want to share on that question of success or community ownership before we move on?
I just wanted to plug Amanda's great work, Success and Community Action. I know you mentioned at the top of here, but I would say that the 8 weeks is really great for anyone who has the capacity and time to do so, to involve yourself in learning a little bit more about what community development looks like, to kind of understand what does success mean for you, but also maybe potentially for your neighborhood. So Success and Community Action.
Thanks for the plug. Another question that the Learning and Action team came up with was, there's a lot of curiosity around how do you keep momentum? It's one thing to start this initiative and, you know, we all have those bursts of energy, but how do you, for those of you who have been doing it a little bit longer, how do you maintain that momentum? For those of you who are maybe newer, what are you kind of putting in place to maintain that momentum? And maybe exploring a bit of like, what is the foundational work that you have done or are doing to help with that?
So I can start by speaking to that. So it's quite new for us. We started in May and then kind of picked back up, took a bit of a break in the summer and picked back up in January this year. So the way we're trying to hold momentum is through this meetup of people once per month, and then also through building a bit of a peer program where people meet with each other kind of in the off time of that month to ask questions about what's going well for you, what are you struggling with, and to really kind of build that recognition that when you're starting something at the ground level, it takes a lot of time to build trust, and we need to move at the speed of trust in our neighborhoods. And so how do we do that together, even if we don't have connections already in our neighborhood? So those are a couple of the ways that we're looking at keeping momentum. And then also like by really asking the questions around like, what does it look like to celebrate the small things, celebrate the encounters that we have with people when we're out walking our dogs or when we're shoveling someone's walk, or those kind of pieces as well.
Great, thank you. Tyson, do you have some thoughts?
Janelle can go.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh.
You go ahead.
All right, sure. Thanks. Three things that I think that the Neighborhood Block Connector program is doing is, one is I kind of mentioned having those drop-in opportunities online, and then I'm going around and interviewing people for our for our neighborhood spotlight. So we have the Crescent Heights View, which is just sort of the local neighborhood paper, and I'm just like asking them how they connect with their neighbors and just doing like an individual piece on people, and it has sort of started off from neighbors that I know who are already kind of just naturally doing the Block Connector program, and then just identifying other people that they might know. So hopefully the goal will be that there's a compiled list of people who have talked about connections, talked about how they want to contribute, and whether or not it's a Block Connector in the specific role, or it's just being part of sort of the energy. As that continues to gain momentum, there'll be a list of people that I've been in contact with some sense of vulnerability. And I think as well, it's that equity piece. So in Crescent Heights, there's 60% of the residents who live here live in apartment buildings or condos. And I mean, although it's the neighborhood block connector. It very much is about people who essentially live in your traditional homes, and Crescent Heights does have a lot of those. But we also want to reinforce this idea that like it might look like what I do in my condo, for example, or on my floor, and maybe that's what that might look like. And so part of that equity piece is there's quite a few low income housing units in Crescent Heights, and I actually have a pre-established relationship with them through some other work that I do. But part of that is there's some programming that's already going on there. So there's there's home space, and in from the colds that I and a few other members on the board are actually trying to just build on those relationships. So what can we do to support them? What does it look like to be a block connector within their space? And I think that will help to really also inform what kind of strengths exist and how can we continue to build a stronger neighborhood.
Great, thanks so much. Janelle, you wanted to pop in.
Yeah, I think the momentum is like the hardest thing to keep going, especially I think now with everything. And for me personally, because I'm not as large of an area as some of the other block connectors, like I really I have my street, and I try and just focus on, you know, mainly on our street, because for me that's kind of where my kid grows up and everything else. But I think the momentum has to come from, you know, when knowing that when you're like example in your January, February blues, you're in the blues, you're low, you're getting tired, you're feeling isolated, you know that your neighbors are too. You know, before we used to have like every January, February, we'd have a wine walk or something. You go to different people's houses with a bottle of wine and kind of do like a wine walk to kind of, now, obviously, again, you can't do that. So, you know, keeping that every 2 to 3 months, finding an event that everyone can kind of go to and reconnect, whether that be a Zoom night, whether that be, you know, someone just posted about the snowman, like what a great idea, like something to ensure people are participating and not, you know, not like weekly for us, but for us, it's like every 2 to 3 months just to stop in and check in with your neighbor and say hi.
That's great, thank you so much. Anne, did you have anything you wanted to share with regards to momentum?
The only thing I can maybe add, and maybe I misunderstood that the other groups are already doing this, is we have a, it is struggling, we're struggling a little bit at this time when people are hunkered down inside their house staying more. But we are trying to do monthly meetings with our block connector group, like sort of just to coalesce together and talk about anything that's going on, have a little mini training session, and just to check in with everybody and give them spread out some ideas about things that they could try, or how they can connect with their block folks. We've done little written newsletter and asked people to deliver it, the block connectors to deliver it to their blocks, or via email, or via hand delivered in the mailbox. So there's a few little things, just yeah, but it'll be nicer when we're able to do more stuff outside. But yeah, it's challenging to think of a few things to do out of doors in the winter when it's nasty cold, and a lot of people don't like to go outside too much. Anyway,
yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So Erica has had her hand up for a while, so we'll hear from Erica, and then I did notice Tyson had his hand up too, so I'll get Erica, then Tyson, and then we'll continue on.
Yeah, so I guess my question for all the panelists, and Tyson, you spoke a little bit to this, when it comes to momentum, like, have you ever sat down and kind of strategically planned out your next steps, or like how to grow, or how to connect in with the groups that already exist in your neighborhood that perhaps, I mean, I get that that's in most cases, except for you, Jody, growing outside your block. But have you ever considered something like that, or how would you start to connect in with some of those pre-existing hubs to kind of show up in your entire community as like one full force? Just any comments you have. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, two things that we do, and that we have a pretty well-established relationship with our business business improvement area, and so the Crescent Heights BIA. And for example, they're putting on an engagement activity next in a couple of weeks here, the Crescent Moon Party, and that's been something that the CA has regularly hosted, but they're taking that on. And I think when we talk also about or already those established areas, that they're also just as much part of the neighborhood as anyone else. And so that's one way that I hope to sort of begin to keep developing, because maybe they might be able to promote different things about the Block Connector program. They're really already we actually work well in tandem together. And so as it is a new program, just continuing to like increase the neighborhood block connector part of what's already existing. And then also something that the reason why I raised my hand was I'm also starting on communications I walk around this neighborhood a lot. And so what I'm seeing is there's about 3 or 4 different condo style duplexes that are coming up. And so what's important to me is to actually introduce those folks to the neighborhood block connector program. So I've created some like communications about, hey, like this is, who we are, more specifically about the Crescent Heights Community Association, but also the value of the neighborhood block connector. So really using some of our key messages around why they're getting this little, sticker on their door about who we are. And so that way then people feel hopefully that, oh, this is a place where I kind of belong, and someone has noticed that I'm have moved in more or less. And so that's my hope. And also I want to be able to have that be something that other people, whether or not they're not very involved in what's happening in Crescent Heights, that this might be something that we can continue to promote, that people go, oh, I have a new neighbor moving in. Oh, I want one of those cards. I'll start that relationship. And right there, that person's connecting. And so I guess for me, it's about also how people start as well.
Thanks. Does anybody else have thoughts or an answer for Erica?
I don't know if my answer is particularly relevant, but I've been trying to connect with kind of everyone we possibly can around this. So anyone in the city who's starting to do this work or in the midst of doing this work. And where that has started for me has just been like doing relational meetings. So having coffee with people, getting to know how they're connecting to their community, and also what they're doing around community development if they're an agency. And usually then that leads me to another person, because they'll often say, have you heard of this community, or have you heard of this agency that's doing that? And so that's basically where I'm at, and the kind of the middle of right now.
Great, thank you. If you haven't been paying attention to the chat, there are some great resources being thrown in here as well, which we'll make sure to copy and share with you after this meeting. But Evan mentioned that there's some great free resources from Edmonton that might be helpful for this. Janelle and Anne, do you want to speak to this, or do you feel like it's been covered?
Like, I think it's been covered, right? Like you have to reach out and kind of find those different groups, like whether it be a mom group or an event, right? Like an example would be Chinese New Year's coming. That's a really big thing for a lot of Chinese people, and they're not going to be able to celebrate. So it's cold, but maybe putting someone out there and saying, hey, can you tell us, maybe we all can come outside and you can tell us over a hot tea about what you would be doing on this day and what it represents for your family, learning about the different events in people's lives. And those usually lead to other community association groups, and you learn more that way.
Absolutely. Which reminds me of a Twitter thread I saw, I think it was earlier today, about Chinese New Year, and this little boy, I think it was a little boy, a little kid, who's really enjoyed all the holidays and going around the neighborhood and seeing the decorations. The family was really worried that when it came to the Lunar New Year, that there wouldn't be any decorations for them to walk around and see. So the parent wrote a little letter and dropped it off to like all of their neighbors. I'm just like, oh, this is our situation. We'd really love if you would be open to doing anything. And they weren't expecting very many people to do anything. They thought like, oh, if we get a couple, that'd be great. But what they found is pretty much everybody put at least like one decoration on their door. And it's really became this like really beautiful thing that's built community. So it's a good reminder that like, let's look at what's already there and let's actually just ask. People are usually pretty open to it. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we have one more question that we wanted to put towards the panel. And then if anybody has other questions that they want to ask, we can invite them in. But the last question that the Learning and Action team put together is, what is one thing that you'd want people to know or think about as they start their own initiative?
I can maybe go first. I think you have to be a little bit patient. I mean, when we started this last year, especially starting it during the pandemic, we were joking about how we would have, 60 block connectors signed up by the end of the year. I mean, we knew we wouldn't, but we were very hopeful it was going to be super successful. And we've had a number, and we've had a few people that have had to turn themselves over due to work commitments, or they were moving out of the neighborhood or whatever. So it's just being patient and continuing to put out the messaging, and don't be discouraged if it's getting a slow start. Just kind of keep at it and know that you're making a difference, even if it's with a smaller group than you were initially hoping with the stars in your eyes when you started the whole thing. But I think people appreciated it. I mean, we try to put an article about what the project is up to in the newsletter each month. So I think it does build a little bit more awareness, and the same thing with the other programs. Like, we've continued with our good food box program throughout the pandemic, and I've been writing articles about, here's the recipe you can use with the stuff that came in your good food box. So it just helps to build awareness. So it's just keep at it, keep plugging away, and slowly but surely we are building more momentum that way, in terms of more people signing up, more people showing interest, and more people saying, look, I can't be the block connector, but I want to be involved in some way. How else can I help? So we've had some people design a survey or do some other work, or prepare some documentation or something like that. Not doing the full commitment of being the go-to person, but being a support person is actually quite helpful as well. So.
Thank you. Who wants to go next with one thing you want people to know?
I think the one people I want is start small, right? Remember, I don't know, a lot of you remember, but like for me growing up personally, I grew up in the Air Force, so it was a base life. Everyone knew your neighbors. I would walk into my neighbor's house unannounced, and if I fell, they would come. And so it's about starting small and getting to know your neighbors. And it's about, now specifically for me, it's about culture and learning about what everyone else has to offer to you. And that if you just try small and say, learn something about them and what they could bring to the table, and ask them, if you ask, generally people would be really willing to say, yeah, I would love to, show you how to make a traditional German, whatever, meal, or a Chinese meal, or whatever. And just start small and invite a couple of people. You may only have 2 show up, but but don't be disappointed, because those 2 will then continue on, and that goes to 4, and that goes to 6. It's all about slowly building those connections.
A very important reminder. Thank you.
I wanted to mention, yeah, it is about really that it's about being patient, and also starting small. And although we're not very far along in our program, I think one of the things that is kind of going back to also like what's special, what are the assets in your community already, and really basing it on that. And one of the things that I've come to really love about Crescent Heights, and I think what generally what people are inspired by is things feel like they're happening, and there's little things that make people feel grounded in their neighborhood. So this is a pretty walkable community, and there's a lot of really interesting, unique things that are around where we've, I think, managed to take advantage of as a CA, where we have like an interactive map, for example. We have a mural that demonstrates all the really fantastic things about our community. And one of the things I really want to begin doing also, and I have been doing in little ways, but is helping people connect that. Like, oh, like I didn't know that thing existed in my neighborhood, or oh, that's like, for example, there's some real historical people that have actually lived in our neighborhood, and they're demonstrated in different ways. We have like a little plaque monument that's in the ground to Michael Jackson, for example, which is really random and weird, but it's like getting people, and someone maintains that actually since 2009. But it is interesting to have people understand like that's my community, that's where I live, and really feel passionate about it. I played on a sports team, I still do, with a group of people who were from Crescent Heights. I didn't know that until I moved here and I realized they all live here, and they are involved. They love the neighborhood, even though I've never seen any of them come to any event whatsoever. But what I do know is that they are engaging with those sort of things. And so sometimes that back to basics is really important too. Like how do people feel about the place that they live in?
Yeah, I think I would really just echo what everyone else said. Especially, I think the pieces around starting small and then kind of moving at the speed of trust and relationship building. So when I started with a list of like 100 people to call that were citizens in their own neighborhoods. And like out of that, I probably had 4 people who were like, yep, I'm actually like, I'm interested, and how do I get engaged? And I think part of it is just like being willing to have those conversations and getting to know where people feel connected in their own neighborhoods and what that looks like, and also honoring people's capacity and where they're coming from and their own sense of how much time they have to give, and recognizing that sometimes that changes as initiatives get built in your neighborhood or things start to get underway. Sometimes that momentum pulls people in who maybe initially didn't have, or maybe they're in a different space in their life and they didn't have capacity at the time, but now they do. And so I think just really honoring where people are at as you do this work too.
Thank you so much to each of you for sharing your wisdom with us this evening. Some 4 very key important lessons to leave us all with. We want to open it up now to other questions that you might have for the panel. I do see Erica threw something in here. Erica also had to leave. So if anybody else wants to put a question forward now, please feel free. Otherwise, I'll read out Erica's question and maybe she can listen to the recording after.
I'd love to hear what everyone responds to Erica's question, because I think it's a great one. But I just had a couple questions for you, Jody, because I think I missed a little bit. But is it my understanding that you're talking to different communities to get the Block Connector program started in communities in Calgary?
Yeah, essentially I'm talking to citizens in different communities in Calgary that are interested in building community or interested in connecting in some way to their neighborhood block. And from that, trying to support them in building capacity around that.
So you're doing that through connecting with individuals, or are you doing that through CAs?
I'm mostly doing that through connecting with individuals, but I'm really happy to connect with CAs too. And I have been trying to connect with some. So Hillhurst Sunnyside, I've talked to a couple of times, and then I've reached out to a few. I'm slowly kind of doing both at the same time.
Yeah, great. One more question. The program in Edmonton, because you said you came from there. I guess I'm just kind of curious what kind of uptake they have. I think they've been doing it for maybe 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, and I came from Edmonton, but full disclosure, was not part of the program, but was aware of it and like connected in the community I lived in, kind of deal.
Mhm.
And I think that, but I have talked to Howard a few times, who is kind of one of the main champions of it there. And I think they have something like, I don't want to get this wrong, but over 30 communities that are connected and at differing levels. And I know the community, so I worked at the public library for a while there, and the community that I was working at the library in was very connected. And I think that's actually Howard's community. And so I saw a lot of social cohesion and like even connection in the library, I think largely because of the relationship in that larger community.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Jody.
Thanks for this great question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tyson.
Oh, no, I was just going to say one of the ways about that leadership, non-leaders, and it just came to me actually. I worked at the Federation of Calgary Communities, and I did a lot of engagement community. I was the engagement coordinator there for a few years. And one of the things that, and I'm going to just replicate this as well, but it was the levels of involvement. And literally it was take this and go to who, like your board or your volunteers, whatever. And it's just an indicator of like, how involved do you want to be? And that could be based on by project, that could be based on your time, and just like really hearing what the other person actually wants to do. Because I mean, if it's strength-based, it really does mean that it's led by the resident, it's led by their capacity and their time, but sometimes that needs to be communicated. And there's so much of this like, I'm sorry, I can't do this, or I'm really busy right now. You know, we've all been there. And I think maybe it is literally putting a pen and paper in front of someone saying, just tell me where you are on this spectrum. And just and hearing and seeing what they say, because that might really help to identify, okay, I know that when you say I'm going to do this 100%, that might not actually be the case. And that's totally okay. But we just don't always know how to communicate that. So that might be a tool to actually use, that I'm going to use as this moves forward, to sort of figure out, you know, non-leaders, leaders, because sometimes they might see people who, you know, as Janelle was saying, oh, like that person looks like a leader. They're engaging with their neighbors. They're doing all these things. I'm not like that. And it's like, no, like, how do you want to show up? And sometimes it's kind of helping people land where that might look like. And so those non-leaders can well, still lead. I mean, you know, so it's a balancing act.
That really comes back down to having those relationships and having those conversations with people to help them and help you understand what they're looking for and help them understand what you're asking. Thanks for sharing that. So I see in the chat that we have a question from Ben that it would be great if we could get to. So Ben asks, what are the biggest barriers to getting the block connector concept more mainstream? How can more formalized groups best support this work? So maybe community development agencies, the city of Calgary, businesses, things like that. So biggest barriers to getting the concept more mainstream. Any thoughts on that?
May I speak?
Sure.
Okay. So Ben, this was a big concern or something that I was wondering when I got started. And the city basically adopts stuff that has traction. So I mean, ultimately, if we want this to be something that's supported across Calgary, it's going to take us on our streets, connecting neighbors, using the framework, spreading it, grassroots, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood. And before you know it, there'll be so many of us doing it and talking about it that the city will go, oh, we probably should be supporting this. So I would suggest Jody. I think she's the one best positioned in this group to kind of bring all the threads together, and she's actively working on taking the resources from Edmonton and contextualizing them to Calgary. And imagine she'll be sucking up people like Tyson and others from across Calgary and kind of getting good collaboration going. So that'd be my suggestion on that.
Thanks so much for piping in, Evan. For those of you who don't know, Evan has been deeply involved with Abundant Communities Copperfield Mahogany as well, and has a lot of wisdom to share too. Any other thoughts on that question of how to make it more mainstream?
I mean, I don't think there's any other way than just doing the work, right? I think you just have to, you can't expect somebody to walk in and just hand things to you. It takes like literally going door to door, or, you know, just talking to people face to face, or through the screen door or whatever, right? It's lots of boots on the ground. So it's by definition, it's kind of a slow process, but you know, it should build a little bit of momentum as you go. And hopefully if you use the communication tools that are available to you in your community, it helps to get the ball rolling a little bit faster. And then, you know, there's potentially a little bit of funding you can access through your ward counselor's office. That's one option. I know they have a budget each year for supporting community initiatives. And maybe through I know our community has a community social worker assigned to our area, so that sometimes they've got some budget assigned as well. So it's, you know, if you need to do printing, but you can often find somebody who can, you know, print a newsletter or something at their office and have that be a donation. So yeah.
And I just wanted to piggyback on that too, and just say, I think the networking piece, like I think the more that we can all be talking together about what we're doing in our communities and building that like larger network, that can kind of build some power within the city to kind of say, this is something that is like got a lot of momentum, it has a lot of buzz happening, but it also is like very effective and really connecting people, and yeah, really supportive in times like COVID. So I think like the more that we're able to just kind of continue to build these sorts of networks, I think the more we can kind of build power towards that.
I also think something as well is press releases. As much as that sound like, do a press release on something and send it to whoever, contact us at Global News, CTV, whomever, because you never really know. I'm always surprised by when things get picked up that I've sent out or whatnot. And yeah, you never know where that goes. And I think I hope that we're still in a space where we want to hear good news stories. And so I think the more that we share that, we kind of like, oh, this is small potatoes, or I don't know how to communicate that properly. Trying and seeing, because they're the experts. They might be able to kind of, they'll, you know, get the lens that they're looking for. But yeah, a press release, I'd say, is one of the ways to kind of keep that momentum going. And if there's a way to maybe frame it as this, you know, neighborhood block connector thing that the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good is doing, or something to kind of get people going with that, I think that really is a opportunity.
Absolutely. And I know there's been talk about having these types of things for years. I know other communities have started and tried, and then it hasn't really gone anywhere. A boss who used to be in the CDLI role, and I used to meet every few months for like 2 years talking about, how do we make this happen? Like, what's it going to take? And we really came down to like, we need somebody who can pilot it and who can make it happen. And so learning about Abundant Communities Copperfield Mahogany was really exciting, and having them be a model that others could, a Calgary-based models that others could turn to. And I do find so much hope and excitement for the network organizing that Jody is able to hold to kind of bring those stories across the city and allow for some of that fostering of support and leadership to happen. So there's a lot of people in the city who are passionate about this and want to make it happen and just aren't sure how to start. Or it's like a very intimidating thing. If you're one person in your community, you know, I want to get this going, but am I doing it right? Or what does this look like? So I think like this is our year. We're going to make it happen. If other people know of anybody who's interested in this or doing it, get in touch with Jody and get in touch with that network. That's going to be really great. And we also want to kind of start to create a map of like what other approaches to asset-based community development are happening, how else are we using our strengths, and how do we start to collectively tell those stories and share them, because you're right, like it's happening, but we need to be better at communicating it more broadly and starting to look at what are some of those partners, whether it's traditional news media, whether it's somebody like the Sprawl who has a huge audience and who's deeply interested in community, but starting to share these stories, I think is going to help us get there. So I see in here, it may already be asked and answered, but I'll read it out just in case there's other thoughts. But Lauren asked Jody, with your passion around connecting to the natural world, have you given much thought to or seen great local applications of how nature can play a role in community building? There's some great conversation happening in the chat, but anything you want to vocalize?
Sure, yeah. So there's a couple within our network who are working on kind of food forest type issues in Mountain View area. So one who's like working on advocating to the city to be able to plant basically a small orchard. And then another who they've reclaimed part of a city block and are creating something that they're calling, which some of you might be aware of this, but they call the Field of Dreams. And it's a food farm for racialized youth that are working together to build. And so I think those are some really great applications. Something I've been thinking about personally in Mount Pleasant is how do we connect people to the ecosystem that is here, specifically in Mount Pleasant? And are there ways to either like build, Confed's really close, so are there ways to build like a labyrinth or a walking trail that would actually like kind of talk about the different more than human world and aspects of that live here with us and what it looks like to be in community with not just the humans that exist here, but also with the plants and animals and the unique ecosystem that is this area. And I'd say every city block has its own unique ecosystem. So kind of thinking about what that looks like as well. But yeah, this is something I could talk about for a long time. So if anyone ever wants to go for coffee about this, I would love to.
Amazing, thank you. And our time is almost up, so I do want to make sure, I know Tyson sort of spoke to Erica's question a little bit already, and there's been some responses in the chat, but I do want to put it out there and see if anybody has any last thoughts on Erica's question of any ideas on how to get people to be non-leader leaders. That's coming from a place of having found many people want to be involved, but shy away from that leadership title in particular. So Tyson shared that really great tool and about really having that open conversation about like how involved you want to be. Does anybody else have thoughts on helping kind of overcome that barrier that sometimes exists where that title puts people off?
So I think for us, like it was asking people like, what would you like to see? Like, you know, if we had an event, what kind of event would you like to participate in? And so kind of going back to that, you know, nature, we started a community garden. And so we have a community garden and everybody has donated a piece of their lot, you know, whether it's the side of your house, the back, and planted a garden. And then the community can come and pick from your garden. And then at the end of the year, we have a harvest party and you make a salad or you make a meal with whatever was grown in the community garden. So that came about from the gardening one. I think you just ask people like, what would you like to see? You know, do you like to paint? Do you like to do yoga, which I think was mentioned? And, or, you know, if I held a certain kind of event, would you at least just come? Just having them come and attend, I think is the biggest point, because then they'll start to engage and that engagement leads to other things, maybe not a leadership role in that sense, but some sort of leadership because they become engaged. It has to start in that small engagement.
Yeah, thank you. Jody, I see you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think part of it too is normalizing that leadership doesn't have to be the big things. And I think that is part of what Janelle was just speaking about, but that each person leads in different ways. And so partly it's by connecting people to their own passions, or by creating space for them to connect to their own passions and skills, and then supporting those. So something like that I actually talk a lot about, something I talk about a lot is that I have social anxiety. And so meetings like this are often very uncomfortable for me, but yet because like I'm passionate about community development and ecology and some of these other things, I can kind of still show up in those places and have these conversations. But I think it's really important to kind of normalize that all of us have different skills and capacities, and it's helping people to lead out of those and connect to those.
Thank you. And Tyson, I see your hand was up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I say this a lot, but like there's room for everyone in community. And I think, oftentimes we live in a very role culture where it's like you have at your job, you have a certain position, you have a certain role, and there's only an infinite amount of roles or money to kind of go around, or you're part of a family and you're this particular role, and there's certain things that you're supposed to be doing. And I think in community, and the reason why we don't really practice, or we don't culturally, we don't really understand how that might work or operate, is because we think, well, there has to be some sort of role for us. And I think that and we even do that at a board level sometimes, and there's a reason for that. But I often think it means that we then limit certain people in feeling like they can get involved. And and that's a huge sort of paradigm cultural shift that I'm kind of speaking to. But I definitely think that if we kind of get stuck in sort of that role oriented, then we really don't allow people to grow. And even people who are in roles, it's also still very limiting. So just kind of keeping that in mind, that for me, there's room for everybody in the neighborhood, more or less, and that varies. But I think if we can kind of change some of our attitude and language, including myself, around what that looks like.
Thanks so much. Does anybody have any last thoughts that they want to share? Could be our panelists, could be anybody in attendance. I'm not seeing any hands or unmuting or things in the chat. So, I see Evans now said, go knock on your neighbor's door. And yes, just wear a mask, yes. Yes, absolutely. I think that's really what it's about, right? It's about just taking that step, keeping it small, keeping it simple, but working on building those relationships, building that trust, and seeing what emerges from there, which is the beauty of this. Also, what can be kind of complicated about it, because Tyson, you're right, it is a very different way of thinking and working and approaching things, and it can be hard for some people to wrap their heads around, but we know community is important. We know we want to be connected to one another. So it starts with us, and it starts with us taking those steps. We have about 5 minutes left. So we just want to say once again, a huge thank you to Tyson, to Jody, to Anne, to Janelle for being here today and being willing to share about your experiences and what you've done. I know I've gained so much from this conversation, and I think we all have, and I'm also really grateful that we were able to record this so that we can share this with other people. This can become one of those things that we point people to help build up that momentum of look at these 4 great groups who are doing this work already. We will share some of those resources that came up in the chat after this and the recording, so you can pass it on to your networks if that's interested, something that would be helpful for you. And we're so grateful for you to have spent your night with us tonight. So to bring us to a formal close, one thing that we like to do here is create space and opportunity for us to share in one word something that we're feeling right now or something that we're leaving with as a way to bring our session to a close. And feel free throw it in the chat, or do you unmute yourself and share, but one thing that you're leaving with, or how you're feeling right now.
I actually, as a panelist, I actually picked up a bunch of good ideas from the other panelists and from some of the questions that people posed. So I'm feeling, let's say, re-inspired.
Awesome, thanks. I see in the chat we have excited, hope, inspired, motivated, connected. Any other thoughts on feelings or things we're leaving with?
Grateful.
Thanks, that's a good one too.
Feeling grateful that everybody else kind of feels the same way and wants to connect and live in a world where we know our neighbors again.
Wonderful. I see self-guided tours have been thrown in here. People really echoing what you just said, Janelle. Rich conversation, grateful for all the work that happens all over the city, impressed. Energized. It's hard for me to come up with a single word as well, but yeah, I would echo whoever said inspired, like super inspired and ready to make this happen all over the city. Sarah just shared, seeing a lot of momentum over time across many communities in our city. Absolutely. Well, if anybody else wants to share, you absolutely can. Otherwise, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for asking great questions, and stay connected. We'll make sure we include contact information for people so that if you want to follow up and get involved in some of these things, you absolutely can. And let's keep this going and let's keep this momentum alive. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks so much for hosting, Amanda.
Our pleasure.